In his will, he left me $6,000 and a condition. If I wanted the rest of the estate, I had to prove he was right. In court. Publicly. In front of everyone we both knew. My name is Grace. I'm 37. An attorney. I've spent most of my career helping clients navigate legal traps. I never thought I'd be the one caught in one. My father, James Banks, was a former district attorney. Sharp, disciplined, intimidating. A man obsessed with order, strategy, and the belief that he was always right. Even in death. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly 7 years. We severed ties after I accused him of protecting one of his colleagues in a case that ruined multiple lives. He never forgave me. Now he wanted me to clean up his legacy. Or else. The will was clear: if I refused to validate his professional integrity, everything, his home, his assets, his pension, would go to his former protege, a man I once tried to prosecute for case tampering. This wasn't a request. It was a dare. A final play from a man who spent his entire life building power and didn't know how to stop, even from the grave. He thought he could force me into defending him, into standing in front of a judge and proving he was an ethical man. But here's what he didn't understand. I'm not the girl he raised to be silent. I'm not the young assistant he once tried to shape in his image. And I'm not afraid of courtrooms. I've built my entire life fighting men like him. So if this is the game he wanted, fine. But I don't play to prove someone else's truth. I play to expose it. My father didn't raise children. He engineered successors. There were no bedtime stories. No, I'm proud of you. Just you can do better, and emotion clouds judgment. He taught me to think 3 moves ahead. To weaponize logic. To see people as evidence, not as people. For a long time I played by his rules. Until I realized his rules were rigged. I found out he covered for men who coerce silence. He buried evidence that didn't fit his version of the truth. He twisted justice into something profitable. And when I called it out publicly by name, he erased me. Now he wants me to defend him? To stand in a courtroom and validate the very legacy I spent years trying to dismantle? This isn't about inheritance. It's about narrative. He thinks he can force me to rewrite the ending. But I don't litigate for comfort. I don't build arguments for love. I fight to expose the lie under the language. So yes, I'll go to court. I'll stand where he thought I'd kneel. But I won't be there to preserve his legacy. I'll be there to finish what I started. And if that means dragging his name through every broken oath he ever made, then that's exactly what I'll do. I started with the boxes. My father's records arrived in 4 sealed containers, neatly labeled, color-coded, dated like he knew someone would be watching. Like he knew I'd come for the truth. I opened them one by one in my living room, coffee growing cold on the table next to me. Case files. Memos. Transcripts. Press clippings. Handwritten notes in his angular, impatient script. Every folder felt like a piece of him. Calculated. Controlled. Clean. And that made me nervous. Because my father didn't leave loose ends. If he left me these files, it wasn't by accident. He wanted me to see something. Or miss something. I flipped through the first 3 boxes quickly, mostly public cases. Ones the press had already eaten alive. But in box 4 I found her name. Marissa Caldwell. It stopped me cold. Because I knew that name. I'd represented her 6 years ago. She was a survivor. She'd accused a city employee, Public Works Division, of coercion, threats, and obstruction. My father wasn't on the case officially. But there he was. A note in the margin of the DA file. MC volatile. May compromise departmental trust. Recommend internal resolution. Internal resolution. That was code. His code. For silence. I sat back, staring at the note. He knew I'd find it. He knew this case haunted me. Marissa had trusted me. I remembered her face. How tired she looked. How angry. How desperate not to be dismissed again. I won her case. Barely. But it cost me my job at the firm. And her name never made it into the final city report. Now I knew why. Because he buried it. Just like he buried dozens of others. I felt the heat rise in my throat. He knew I'd find her file. He left it there on purpose. Not as proof. As bait. Because if I wanted to prove he was right, I'd have to erase her all over again. I'd have to stand in front of a court and say under oath that James Banks handled things properly. That he followed the law. That he did the right thing. Even when I had the receipt in my hand that said otherwise. This wasn't justice. It was a dare. A final test from a man who never let me win on my own terms. He wanted me to twist myself into his image one last time. But I don't twist anymore. I stand. And I choose. I picked up the phone and called my associate, Brian. I need everything on Marissa Caldwell. And I mean everything. Court records, internal emails, settlement memos. If it has a date stamp, I want it. He didn't ask why. He knew that tone. It's the one I use when I stop playing defense. I hung up and returned to the boxes. If my father wanted a trial, he'd get one. But not the one he expected. Not the clean version. Not the polished tribute. He thought the condition in his will would control me. He forgot who raised me. He built me to win. And now I'm going to use everything he taught me. To destroy the legacy he tried to die protecting. By the end of the week, Brian had a folder on my desk. Thick. Heavy. Labeled in his clean block handwriting. Caldwell, Marissa, internal correspondence and suppressed documents. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I opened it. The first page was an email from my father. Timestamp: 3 weeks before the original complaint was filed. Subject: preemptive containment strategy. I read it 3 times. He'd known. Before the report even hit his desk. There were more. Memos between department heads. Ensure this stays within internal HR channels. Do not escalate to DA review. Banks advise minimal exposure protocol. They were playing defense before Marissa had even told her story. They were already preparing to silence her. And he led the charge. The next document made me sit down. A copy of the settlement agreement. Signed by Marissa. Dated 2 weeks before I ever met her. She'd already settled and then came to me out of desperation because the settlement wasn't enforced. Because the man she'd accused was still in his job. Still protected. Still smiling. My father knew all of it. And he let it happen. I closed the folder and stared out the window, my jaw tight. This wasn't legacy. This wasn't law. It was rot. And now it had a paper trail. I picked up the phone. Dialed the probate court clerk. This is Grace Banks. I'm submitting a supplemental challenge to the conditions outlined in the will of James Banks. The clerk hesitated. Then, what's the basis, Ms. Banks? Fraud, I said flatly. And suppression of material evidence that directly contradicts the condition being enforced. Silence on the other end. Then, you're challenging your father's legacy? No, I said. I'm exposing it. I hung up. Felt the blood rush back to my face. I wasn't scared. Not anymore. I was angry. Focused. Alive. He wanted a legacy? He get one. But not the one he carved into courthouse walls or stitched into press releases. This one would have footnotes. Receipts. And testimony. Because Marissa deserved that. Because I deserved that. And maybe just maybe this town did too. Filing the challenge wasn't the hard part. Living with it was. The story hit local news within 48 hours. Then regional. Then national. DA's daughter seeks to overturn father's legacy. Calls for investigation into suppressed cases. I didn't speak to reporters. I let the filing speak for itself. The documents. The emails. The proof. But the town? The town had opinions. Some called me brave. Others called me a disgrace. Throwing dirt on your own blood, one woman spat at me in line at the post office. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her and said, truth doesn't care who shares your DNA. She didn't answer. She just looked away. Because deep down, they all knew. This was bigger than family. This was about power. About silence. About the things no one wanted to say out loud when James Banks was alive. But I would. I did. I received hundreds of emails that week. Some anonymous. Some threatening. But some broke me. One came from a woman named Cheryl Dunn. Subject line, he silenced my daughter too. I opened it with shaking hands. Her daughter had filed a harassment complaint in 2008. Same internal pathway. Same pattern. Same signatures. Her file had vanished. No record in the archives. But Cheryl had kept everything. Scans. Printouts. Notes. She'd been waiting. Not for revenge. For someone to listen. I called her that night. She cried when I introduced myself. Everyone told me to move on, she said. But I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew what he did. You're not crazy, I said. And you're not alone. We talked for hours. By the time we hung up, I knew this wasn't just a court challenge anymore. It was a reckoning. I reopened Marissa's case. filed a motion to reclassify the original settlement as coerced under prosecutorial intimidation. It wouldn't be easy. The statute of limitations was a maze. But I didn't care. I'd walk it blindfolded if I had to. Because this time, I wasn't just defending the truth. I was dismantling the lie. And I was only getting started. The court granted the review. It was official now. Not a protest. Not a whisper. An open, formal investigation into the conduct of the late James Banks, former district attorney. My father. The headlines changed. They no longer called me a disgruntled daughter. Now I was lead counsel in a posthumous corruption review. Funny how quickly the truth changes when paperwork catches up. I was granted access to the internal archives, records never meant to see daylight. I walked into the district records office with gloves, a scanner, and a memory like steel. They handed me a key. Basement level. Room 4. The lock stuck. I kicked it open. Inside, rows of unmarked boxes. Some were labeled closed. Others do not transfer. And dozens were simply marked with his initials, JB. I started cataloging everything. Notes on settlements that never reached court. Memos requesting charges be dropped for discretionary reasons. Names. Dates. Victims. Every file built the same way, strategic language, buried details, subtle threats of reputation risk. He didn't make mistakes. He made a machine. And I was tearing it apart cog by cog. 3 hours in, I heard a knock. I turned. A young man stood in the doorway. Nervous. Familiar. It took me a second to place him. His name was Theo Chen. He'd interned under my father the summer before everything fell apart. He stepped forward. I heard about the review, he said. I've been carrying something. I raised an eyebrow. He pulled a flash drive from his coat pocket. This is from my time clerking. Memos. Audio files. One meeting in particular, your father ordered me to delete the recording. I didn't. Why are you giving this to me now? I asked. His face twisted. Because I thought he was a hero. And now I know better. He looked at me like he expected permission. Or forgiveness. I gave him neither. Just a nod. Sit down, I said. Let's go through it together. And we did. For hours. And when we finished, I told him the truth. You don't owe me bravery. But if you're ready to testify, you might just change everything. He didn't speak. He just nodded. That was enough. For now. The audio Theo gave me wasn't just damaging. It was explosive. My father's voice, low and unmistakable on tape, neutralized the complaint. She's emotional, not credible. HR will handle it quietly. There it was. In his own words. Not just silence. Strategy. Manipulation. Power dressed in procedure. I submitted the file to the court as supplemental evidence. The moment it was entered into record, the air shifted. Suddenly, I wasn't just the daughter of James Banks. I was the woman dismantling him. The DA's office announced a formal criminal inquiry into posthumous misconduct. It had never been done before in our jurisdiction. But the evidence was undeniable. The press called it historic. The town called it betrayal. And me? I called it justice. Reporters followed me to court. Podcasts dissected my interviews. Theo's name trended online. He gave a statement, calm and steady, in front of a packed room. I believed in him. Until I saw what he did when no one was watching. I stood behind him. Not to protect him. To honor the courage it took to speak. I didn't expect the aftermath. The messages. From women I didn't know. From daughters. Assistants. Paralegals. Women who'd worked for men like my father and stayed silent. Now they weren't silent. They were watching. And I realized something. This case? It wasn't just mine anymore. I was no longer arguing emotion. I was leading a reckoning. And somewhere in the back of my mind I felt it. That quiet presence. His voice. His control. His shadow. Watching. Maybe for the first time in his life. He was afraid of me. And God, that felt good. The courtroom was full. Not packed with strangers. Packed with eyes. Judges. Clerks. Reporters. Colleagues. Former friends. Enemies. All of them. Watching. Waiting. I stood before the bench with no script. No emotion. Just truth. I am here today to answer the condition placed in my father's will. I began. To prove he was right. A ripple through the crowd. The judge nodded for me to continue. I lifted the file. Exhibits. Transcripts. Testimony. I laid them out on the table. I will not defend a man who silenced victims. I will not validate a legacy built on fear. I played the tape. My father's voice, cold and clinical, echoed through the chamber. The room shifted. No one moved. I turned back to the bench. I reject the inheritance, I said. Not out of spite, but principle. Gasps. From the gallery. From the press. Even from the defense. The judge looked stunned. You're sure? He asked. I nodded. Absolutely. Because I was. I didn't want his house. His pension. His title. I wanted freedom. And I had it now. The judge took a long pause. Then spoke. This court accepts your refusal. The remainder of the estate will be passed according to the fallback clause. Meaning it would go to his protege. I didn't care. Let him have the stone walls. The fake medals. The blood-stained desk. I had the truth. And I wasn't carrying his name like a shield anymore. I walked out of that courtroom with nothing in my hands. And everything in my spine. Straight. Unbreakable. Whole. And when the cameras met me outside, I didn't flinch. I didn't smile. I just said, he taught me how to win. I just finally chose what I was fighting for. Months passed. The headlines faded. The hashtags died. The noise dulled. But the echoes? They stayed. I didn't go on book tours. I didn't sign a Netflix deal. I didn't need to. I started walking to work again. Stopped hiding my name. Stopped lowering my voice. People looked at me differently now. Not with pity. Not even with awe. With recognition. With fire. You're the one who stood up. They didn't say you're the DA's daughter. That part was gone. Exactly as it should be. I was invited to speak at universities. Panels. Conferences. I declined most of them. But I said yes to one thing. Building something new. A legal review program for survivors of suppressed cases. It wasn't flashy. No PR. Just a small team. One phone. One form. But within weeks, the stories poured in. Names I'd never heard. Patterns I recognized too well. I realized then. My father hadn't invented the system. He had simply mastered it. And now? I was here to undo it. Case by case. Person by person. Not loud. Not heroic. Just real. I met with Cheryl Dunn again. She hugged me so tightly I almost cried. I thought no one would ever believe us, she whispered. I believe you, I said. And I meant it. Because I finally believed myself. I wasn't here to burn it all down. I was here to build something better on top of the ashes. He used to say justice was a weapon. I learned it's a seed. And I'm planting it everywhere he never dared. A year later, everything felt quieter. Not silent, but settled. I still worked with survivors. Still answered calls from lawyers who didn't know how to name what they were seeing. Still walked into courtrooms with nothing to prove but everything to change. But inside, I was different. I didn't brace every time I heard his name. Didn't flinch when I passed the courthouse with his plaque still on the wall. They hadn't taken it down. Maybe they never would. That was okay. Because people didn't look at the plaque anymore. They looked at the woman walking past it. The one who didn't look away. One morning, I opened my email and saw a message from a name I didn't know. Subject line, you don't know me, but I know what you did. Inside was a letter. From a third-year law student. She'd watched the hearing live stream from her dorm. Took notes. Cried. Changed her career path because of it. She wrote, I didn't know women like you were allowed to exist in courtrooms. Now I do. I don't want to be perfect. I want to be honest. I want to be brave. I want to be dangerous like you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Not crying. Not smiling. Just still. Because that was the legacy. Not the building. Not the estate. Not the name. A girl who thought she had to fit in. Now choosing to stand out. I replied simply. Then don't stop. The system won't bend unless we break it. Start where you are. And keep going. I closed my laptop. Went outside. The sky was soft. The day was quiet. And for once, I wasn't fighting. I wasn't proving. I wasn't surviving. I was living. Exactly as I should be.